when silence falls over the sanctuary and the prayers seem unanswered for generations, who does God raise up to speak? Sometimes he doesn't choose the strong, the visible, or the qualified. Sometimes he calls out to a child in the dark, a child born from the womb of a weeping mother, a child born not from pride or ambition, but from a promise. That child was Samuel. While other children were raised at home, rocked to sleep by their mothers, Samuel grew up in the courts of the Lord, wrapped in the aroma of sacrifice, sleeping beneath the golden lampstand, surrounded by the holy silence of a God who had not spoken in a long time. He was just a boy, yet set apart, dedicated before his first breath. His mother, Hannah, had given him away not out of abandonment, but out of worship. Every thread of his life was stitched with divine purpose. But while Samuel's young heart burned with simple obedience and awe, corruption was rotting the priesthood from the inside out. Eli, the high priest, once a faithful servant, now stood in the shadows of compromise. His eyes grew dim, not just physically, but spiritually. And worse, his sons Hophni and Phinehas were defiling the sanctuary. They took the best portions of the sacrifices for themselves, despising the offerings of the Lord. They lay with the women who served at the entrance of the tent of meeting. They were sons of Belial, not of God. And Eli knew. He heard the reports, he saw the signs, but he rebuked them with soft words, unwilling to confront the rebellion in his own household. He let his bloodline outweigh his fear of God. And heaven watched. The Ark of the Covenant still rested behind the veil. The incense still burned. The rituals continued, but the presence was grieving. The people came to worship, but their trust in the priesthood was fading. Yet in that atmosphere of decay, the Lord planted a seed. Not among the powerful, but in the hands of a child, Samuel ministered before the Lord, wearing a linen ephod, his small hands offering what he knew his heart fully surrendered. Every year his mother would visit him, bringing him a little robe. Can you imagine that a mother, sewing a garment with tears and prayer, not knowing what battles her son would face, but trusting the one who called him? And God saw. In a time when the word of the Lord was rare and visions were not widespread, heaven had not gone silent. It was waiting for someone who would listen. Someone pure, someone who hadn't been tainted by the compromises of man. Someone God could trust with his voice. So the stage was set, an old priest losing vision and corrupted sons drunk with power, and a boy, just a boy, sleeping near the ark, ready to be awakened. And that's when it happened. The night was still. The flame of the lamp of God had not yet gone out. Samuel lay down in the temple, innocent and unaware that this night would mark the turning point of his entire life. And then a voice pierced the silence. Samuel the boy stirred, confused. He ran to Eli's room. "Here I am. You called me." But Eli had not spoken. "Go back and lie down," the old priest said. Again the voice came, "Samuel," and again the boy ran, obedient, humble, willing. 3 times the Lord called. 3 times Samuel responded, but not to the one who truly spoke. It was Eli, blind in many ways, who finally recognized what was happening. His age had dulled his eyes, but not completely his memory of how God speaks. "If he calls you again," Eli said, "gently say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went back, heart-pounding breath, shallow, lying still in the dark, waiting. The voice came once more, not in thunder, not in fire, but in divine intimacy. "Samuel, Samuel." And the boy said, "Speak, for your servant is listening." Heaven had found an open heart. God did not waste time with small talk. He gave Samuel a message of judgment, a vision filled with weight and sorrow. It was about Eli, about the priesthood, about the sin that had not been restrained. "I am about to do something in Israel," the Lord said, "that will make the ears of everyone who hears it tingle. I will carry out against Eli everything I spoke, because his sons blasphemed, and he did not restrain them." Can you imagine what that must have felt like for a child to hear? A divine judgment placed upon the man who had raised him, the house he lived in, the very system he served under morning came. Samuel lay awake, unsure, afraid. He didn't rush to Eli with the message. He didn't celebrate his first vision. He feared, because a true calling doesn't come with comfort, it comes with cost. Eli called him, "Samuel, my son." And the boy came trembling. "What did he say to you? Do not hide it from me." So Samuel told him everything. Not a word was withheld. And Eli, broken by his own resignation, simply said, "He is the Lord. Let him do what is good in his eyes." From that day forward, everything changed. Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him. And not one word that he spoke fell to the ground. All of Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, recognized that Samuel was a prophet of the Lord, not because he sought recognition, but because he listened. He had ears to hear and a heart to obey. The boy who once heard the whisper of God at night now carried his voice to a nation. And meanwhile, the house of Eli declined further. The weight of years and compromise bore down on the priest. The sins of Hophni and Phinehas continued, and the people whispered a ewe of it with growing discontent. The once holy sanctuary had become stained with arrogance, and soon judgment would fall. But through it all, Samuel stood like a lamp in the darkness, young but set apart, quiet but filled with the authority of heaven. In the midst of decline, God had raised a voice, not corrupted by power, not manipulated by fear. A child became the channel of divine revelation. And isn't that like our God? He bypasses thrones and titles. He walks past those who think they own his altar. He looks for the humble, the surrendered, the ones who still whisper, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." Years passed, but the voice of the Lord did not grow silent again. It echoed through the life of the young prophet who had learned to listen. Samuel matured, not just in age, but in spiritual authority. He was no longer the boy in the tabernacle. He became the voice of heaven to a nation desperately in need of one. But judgment divine and unstoppable was still approaching the house of Eli. The Philistines, ancient enemies of Israel, rose up in battle. Israel, desperate and spiritually confused, went to fight without asking the Lord. Defeated in the first skirmish, they decided to bring the Ark of the Covenant to the battlefield, believing it would force God's hand. But God is not a token. He does not ride in like a mascot for those whose hearts are far from him. And so Hophni and Phinehas, those same sons of Eli, who had defiled the house of God, carried the ark into the battle as if their hands were clean. But God would not be mocked. The Philistines were terrified at first, but they fought, and Israel fell. 30,000 men died that day. The ark was captured, the sons of Eli were slain, and the sacred was dragged into enemy hands because the people had treated it as superstition and not covenant. Back in Shiloh, an old man waited. Now Eli sat by the road, trembling not for his sons, but for the ark. He was blind now, heavy in body and in spirit, burdened by years of warnings he did not heed. A messenger ran from the battlefield with torn clothes and dust on his head. "Israel has fled, your sons are dead. Enan!" And the ark of God has been captured. At that word, "the ark has been captured," Eli fell backward off his seat. His neck broke, and he died. The old priest who once served faithfully, who once taught a young boy to hear the voice of the Lord, ended his days crushed by the weight of disobedience. The tragedy didn't stop there. Phinehas's wife was pregnant near labor. Upon hearing the news, her husband dead, her father-in-law fallen, and the ark gone, she gave birth in despair. She named the child Ichabod, saying, "The glory has departed from Israel." The glory had departed. But in the ashes of loss and judgment, Samuel remained. He did not die on the battlefield. He was not swept away by the corruption of Eli's house. He stood. He remained in Shiloh. And he began to rebuild what others had defiled. Because Samuel wasn't just a prophet. He became a reformer. He called Israel to repentance. He reminded them of the covenant. He judged them with justice. And when the people finally begged for a king, it was Samuel who anointed Saul the first king of Israel, under God's instruction. It was Samuel who later confronted Saul's rebellion. It was Samuel who would one day anoint David the shepherd boy after God's own heart. From a child who whispered, "Speak, Lord," Samuel became the voice that nations trembled to hear. And what can we learn? God does not need a majority. He doesn't need a perfect system. When institutions rot, when leaders fall, when the ark seems lost and the glory has departed, he looks for one, just one who will listen, one who will obey, one who will not bow to convenience or corruption. Samuel's story reminds us that purity still matters, that obedience is louder than eloquence, that a child's faith can shake the heavens more than a priest's robe. And it reminds us that even in seasons of judgment, God is still raising up voices, not always where we expect, not always from the palaces or pulpits, but from the quiet places, from the children left behind at the altar, from the mothers who dared to surrender what they loved most. The word of the Lord may be rare, but it is never extinct. His silence is not absence, it is preparation. So let us ask, are we listening? Because somewhere tonight, in the stillness of a weary world, God is calling again. Samuel, and maybe, just maybe, he's calling you.